Will independent optometry survive? Well, of course, that's what you're all here to have an answer to. And unfortunately, there is no short answer to that. There is no quick fix, as you will learn tonight. There's a lot of unknowns, but we will try to give you some sort of a background, and you will hopefully walk away from here with a little more knowledge than you have now. But believe me, there is no yes or no answer. Our speaker is Mr. Harry Rosen. Now, I'm sure that Harry, we often talk about people who need no introduction. But I really am serious. You need to know introduction. I'm sure that everybody in this room knows who Harry Rosen is. Harry he wears a couple of hats. He's the CEO of an organisation called PBAE, but relevant to tonight, he is the consulting CEO to the South African Optometric Association, and he will talk to us quite a lot about the future of optometry, and he has great insight into exactly why you are here. So without any further ado, I want to introduce Mr. Harry Rosen. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Peter, for that introduction. No pressure. I just thought it was appropriate to start off with a story that's been told a few times, but appropriate to repeat it. And it takes the form of an optometrist who'd been around for a very long time. He had a practice on a coastal centre, and he'd weathered many storms. And on this particular occasion, the day before he drove to his practice, he heard the weather report that it's going to be a bit rough. But I repeat, he'd been around the block many times, he's been successful, and he carried on doing what he's always done. But when he got to his practice, it was flooded to a degree, the water was up to his feet, and the fire engine came along and said, "Mr. Optometrist, please come on board, I need to assist you, you can't stay here." And the optometrist was adamant. He'd been around a long time, weathered many storms. And lo and behold, it got worse and worse, and the water then went up to his knees, and a boat arrived and said, "Mr. Optometrist, please, this is not looking too good." And the optometrist said, "Look, please don't lecture to me. I've been very successful in my career. I've been here for a very long time." And eventually it got quite bad, where the water had reached levels that was not too good. In fact, he landed on the roof and a helicopter came along and said, "Mr. Optometrist, please, you can't stay where you are." And the optometrist had great faith. He'd always walked a certain path and been very successful. But eventually, the optometrist landed up at the gates of heaven. He had drowned. And needless to say, he wasn't happy. So he confronted the representative of heaven and said, "Why have you forsaken me? I've had a lot of faith, I've always walked a straight line, and you've let me down." And the representative from heaven said, "Well, what do you mean? I sent you a fire engine, a boat, and a helicopter." So the moral of the story is that we operate in a certain way, and there are certain signs and symptoms that we sometimes ignore. And unfortunately, that gets sometimes translated into a gloomy, doomy sort of approach, when in fact what needs to take place is to really take cognizance of some of the changes around you. There are organizations that act on your behalf, and I'll come back to that a little bit later on. So for the purpose of my presentation, I'm not sure how clear that is. I'll just go through the agenda very quickly. I'm just going to share with you some factors, forces and fears that characterizes the optometry environment at this point in time. Needless to say, there's some emphasis on the independent practice, and as I go through, you'll recognize some of those factors. It's just regrettably that we use our own terminology from time to time, and that's really the sort of, I don't want to call it a conflict, but the differences between what's referred to as optometry versus shoptometry. And I'll make a few comments about that. Probably most of you know that eye care is in the process of changing quite dramatically. And the question is, is the profession embracing those changes? If you look at the incidence of some of the conditions, it's very different to what it used to be in the past. There have also been some very important interventions that have taken place quite recently. The Health Market Inquiry, which was an inquiry set up by the Competitions Commission to analyse private care, and to look at ingredients in a sort of healthcare recipe which included pricing, access to care, and any sort of anti-competitive conduct that they may have come upon. And I'll share some of their conclusions with you. I think most of you will also know that the medical device regulations were introduced to this country for the very first time in December 2016. And I know that may come as a surprise to some, because it is a very new set of rules and regulations which will definitely have some impact on the audience and the sponsors in one way or another. So to come back to the factors and forces and the fears, I've only been given, I think a colleague on my right was given 20 minutes, I've been given 15. So just to highlight the fact that there are trends and factors that are taking place. I think, and I'll stop really saying most of you will know because it's common knowledge, the merger between Essol and Oxotica, that has significance globally and locally. Walmart has entered the optometry world, providing eye care devices. Pharmacy has entered the world of optometry, Walgreens and CVS. And I think probably you'll also have recognized that even in this country, there have been entrances into the field of audiology. So those are players that weren't players before. And then what they call category disruptors. They're not all really specific to optometry. I think Amazon is well known. Warby Parker is well known. Zappos is a footwear organization that's extended into clothing. Zenni Optical. I'm just using names. I'm name dropping a little bit to highlight the fact that the players of yesteryear are no longer necessarily the players of today on a global stage. I think the other interesting sort of dimension of optometry, but it's relevant for healthcare across the board. I've just referred to as acronomology. The fact of the matter is that there are so many acronyms that characterize the profession. I don't think it's really unreasonable to come to the conclusion that confusion does creep into the environment from time to time. And some of them have received more attention than others. As an example, the prescribed minimum benefits that you see, the PMBs. The Council for Medical Schemes have instituted a review process to ensure that the PMBs are in alignment with the National Health Insurance. And I don't want to get too much because I know Nikki is going to be speaking in more detail a little bit about that. I've already mentioned the health market inquiry. There's the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see DRGs, diagnosis-related groupings, and it's really been embraced in managed care in the States, but it's been looked at in this country as well. Just as giving an example, if I move outside optometry and look at a condition like pneumonia, there's a diagnosis-related grouping. You take a condition like pneumonia, and all facets of the treatment of pneumonia are taken into consideration under one umbrella, so that, as an example, the funders and the government will be able to establish what pneumonia costs to a country. So myopia would not be too far removed from that concept. I also just want to make the point, and I'm sorry, I see it is very small, when I said that there are organizations that do speak on your behalf. The South African Optometric Association has a voice. So I'm just going to go through some of these interventions and submissions that have taken place where optometry has been represented. The National Health Insurance, there's been a strong representation. The medical device regulations, strong representation. Just as a matter of interest, I'll come back to the health market inquiry. There's been documentation that's been requested for organizations like the Optometric Association where views and opinions have been sought to deal with pricing. And you'll see a little bit later on, the health market inquiry have now recommended the establishment of a new regulator that will be responsible for the setting of prices. So I'll come back to that. The prescribed minimum benefits I've spoken about. The issue of the prohibition of discounting and incentives, rebates and sampling, which is under the banner of the medical device regulations. Therapeutics, online sale of spectacles, online sale of contact lenses and so forth. So there's a tremendous amount that's been taking place on your behalf that hopefully you'll get to know about. So when we have a look at the South African scenario, the South African market, and you look at the total number of practices, which is estimated to be in the region of 2,500, There are actually 3,700 optometrists registered in South Africa, but that is encompassing 2,500. If you look at the split between independent practices, and I know some of the franchises are here, so you'll be gentle with me afterwards, so I'll refer to you as corporate, or the franchises, the split in terms of practice numbers is 65 versus 35% at this point in time. It's just interesting. There's been quite a lot of work done internationally, to compare the different modalities, the practice modalities. It's just a great pity, from a South African point of view, there's not a tremendous amount of market information. In fact, I'd suggest to you that that's one of the greatest weaknesses of the profession at this point in time. If you go outside to the pharmaceutical industry, they can take one given product, a line item. So I'll use a very old brand called Valium. If there was something called Valium Drops, the representatives of the company would be able to tell you what the market share of Valium Drops are in Killarney. So it's very sophisticated information. Regrettably, if I may repeat myself, South Africa, the optometry profession in South Africa doesn't share that. But there are three categories of eye care consumers, for want of a better term: the independent loyalists, the retail loyalists, and then you get what's often referred to as the hybrids. So a good example of a hybrid is somebody who goes to perhaps an independent practitioner for a thorough eye exam, and then takes the prescription and goes to another model. It could be a franchise for the spectacles to be made up. I think it's important tonight, if you look at all the articles that have been written, the international conferences and so forth, that despite all the changes that are taking place, there's one or two components that differentiate you from everybody else that will assist to tackle some of the challenges. And that is, you have distinctive knowledge and expertise. And the relationship of trust that develops between you and your patients, I don't think should be underestimated. I also just want to make the point in terms of the eye care experience. This comes from a survey done in the States by an organization called Bain, where they looked at the differences between corporate or retail optometry and independence. And this had specific relevance to diabetic screening, where 77% of independent patients were screened for diabetes in independence and 66.6% with retail. But the bottom line is that the extension of scope, for want of a better term, the extension of service is become quite a critical component in terms of dealing with the environmental changes that are taking place. I mentioned earlier on the changes in eye care, and this is not particularly an area of my expertise, so I'm just going to touch on it. But I think it's fair to say that we have a population that's aging. And that we have our children today that are sometimes referred to as digital natives or Generation Z, where they are near-point tasks. And I know even articles written by Professor Yanni Ferreira recently has suggested that the myopia could be environmental more than, as an example, genetic. So when I speak about changes and shifts in the thinking of different eye care conditions, and to illustrate the point that internationally there appears to be an increased demand for eye care. A gentleman whose name I'm not going to try and pronounce in any way is from Brian Holden Vision Institute. We are going down the path of having a myopia epidemic. And that basically is well supported by the fact, and you'll see a little bit later some of the statistics that have been put out by the World Health Organization, that myopia today globally is the most common eye condition in the world. It's the number one, which requires the prevention of blindness on that list. So the World Health Organization has said 8 out of every 10 children may become myopic by the age of 16 years old. So if you translate, for those of you that are mathematically orientated, that means by the year 2030, that a third of the entire world's population would be myopic, 2.5 billion. So just to make the point, I'll start off with that story, that business as usual is probably not a good idea. Things are shifting from many points of view. So I mentioned the health market inquiry, and I don't think it should be underestimated because it actually impacted across the entire healthcare profession. It involved, or it focused a lot on private hospitals, medical schemes, optometry. There were submissions by players that are active within the optometry world and so forth. But these are just some of the points that we felt was relevant to share. The supply regulator, I'm going to come back to, it's my next slide. But I already mentioned there's a regulatory authority that's been recommended to be formed to address issues like pricing. The other interesting point is that the panel that was formed by the Competitions Commission, the Health Market Inquiry Panel, it basically said that the regulatory authorities don't appear to really understand the competition-related issues in the country, and have strongly recommended that, as an example, that the Health Professions Council rules are reviewed, thoroughly reviewed. So that could have some significance in terms of moving forward. Because some of you may know that it was in 2010, I think, Nikki, where the Health Professions Council had applied for exemption from the Competitions Commission. And that exemption was rejected by the Competitions Commission on the basis that some of the rules appear to be anti-competitive or restrictive trading, depending on the application. The issue of designated service providers is a really key issue within optometry. I'm talking about, as an example, the optometric networks. And again, no disrespect, it is what it is. You've got Isuresu, you've got PPN, and one or two others. The Health Market Inquiry Panel has supported the concept of designated service providers on the basis that it drives costs down for the patient. And it's a very controversial one, as you know, because even there are exclusive arrangements where certain practitioners aren't included. But I repeat, for the 15 or so minutes I've got, I'm just highlighting important points. The other important point, and the purpose of a presentation like this is not to create alarmist responses. But the Competitions Commission, and I must be quite blunt, from our personal point of view, was a bit of a surprise, where they've supported the concept of a certificate of need. In other words, the certificate of need was bandied around for some time. I think it was included in the Act some time ago, which means that for practitioners who are wanting to practice at a certain site would then have to apply for a certificate. The Minister of Health was at the meeting where some of these recommendations were put forward, and there would be some form of grandfather clause. In other words, if you are already in practice, you wouldn't have to then apply. For the newer practices, they would have to apply, and I guess that's all to do with distribution or service. The other interesting thing is that they called for a uniform coding system. So we have Mr. John Stein, who's the architect and father of coding for optometry in many ways. But they basically said that for each profession to have its own set of codes, is not the way to go. There should be a uniform or universal coding structure along the lines of ICD-10. And lastly, they had a lot to say about medical schemes, and they highlighted some of them, such as Discovery, as saying that the way that they operate is not conducive to healthy competition. Just in terms of the health market, the supply regulator, the regulatory authority, it will have the same status as the Health Professions Council and the Council for Medical Schemes. So it's an independent regulatory authority. And they felt it was important to have an independent authority for one major reason. Because in the past, where the medical schemes and the professions, and I'm going back before the Competitions Commission became so strict and the laws were changed and so forth, that the medical aids seemed to have the upper hand, basically dictating the benefits and the pricing. So the role of an independent supply regulator would be able to just do that, regulate pricing, where negotiations would take place. The regulator is from a recommendation point of view, would also be responsible for the coding structure that I just spoke about, the uniform coding structure. And the other point that was raised by the panel, the Health Market Inquiry Panel, is that the practice number, the PCNS, the practice number coding system, would be taken away from the BHF and be given to this regulator. I also just wanted to make a point, and I know it's a slide that we were supposed to have that I didn't bring, so I apologize, that obviously in a forum like this we can't really breach any of the basic principles of competition law and get involved in pricing issues too much. But simply to say that it's very likely moving forward that the imbalance of a fee structure would need to be addressed. And what I mean by an imbalance, if you take an average, I'm going to say an account from an optometric practice, I'm just going to round it off and average it out. 10% is professional procedures, 9% is the materials. So moving forward, it's likely that that balance will be sort of evened out a little bit. So as an example, it's not impossible for the price of lenses to come down, but for a percentage of that lens to be put aside to form part of the professional component of the fees. As an example, a professional fee for dispensing. So instead of 90-10, it could be 65-35. So please don't take the examples too literally. It's the principles that I wanted to present for your consideration that are important. Just on the medical devices, where's Peter? Okay. Yeah, now, very sternly showing me his watch. Very nice watch. Just to make the point, that there was a lot of support for the medical device regulations. A lot of people, had misread the reasons why there was support for the medical device regulations. And the medical device regulations really is a spin-off it's really a spin-off from the Medicines and Related Substances Act. And the reason why there was support for it is to basically ensure that product that came to this country would be of high quality and safe. Because at this point in time, anybody can bring in any lens from anywhere and make any claim that they wish to claim. However, moving forward, I think it was from the 1st of June last year, where the prohibition of discounts, bonuses, rebates, incentives, and samples, I'm just putting into one package, sections 18 and 18B of the Medicines and Related Substances Act. So this has huge consequences for a profession like optometry, from a supplier point of view as well as from the profession. So that means that if these regulations are introduced, that means that you will no longer be able to get a discount, you won't be able to bonus, rebate, and so forth. And also from a sampling point of view, there are some big considerations. What about the trial lenses, the contact lens companies here, the labs here tonight? The same as donations. I know the ophthalmologists had a major problem last year. They weren't able to provide certain lenses because of the introduction of these regulations. So where we are at the moment with this is that you probably all know, I said I was going to stop saying that, so I lied, so sorry about that. But the bottom line is that we all had an opportunity to comment as to the suitability or the appropriateness of these regulations. So these regulations have been put on hold until the end of this year. So the Council for Medical Schemes, who were responsible for the regulations, are now referred to as SAHPRA, the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority. So they were only responsible for medicines, and because the advent of the medical device regulations, they now are all-encompassing. So I repeat, there's a moratorium, for want of a better word, until the end of this year. These regulations have not been introduced. I will share an opinion that there may be some differences. The medical devices are categorized according to risk. So as an example, there's A, B, C, and D. The high-risk products are category D. The low-risk products are category A. It's very unlikely in our engagement with the SAHPRA that they're going to be very, very stern and strict with the category A at this point in time. So you'll see they're going to be starting to call up products in not too distant future. They're going to start with category D, and they'll leave A for a while. Yeah. So I'll go back in terms of what are these challenges, and I'll stand by what was said early on. If you have a look at the surveys that were done while patients stay with their practitioner, it's because of what you see on the screen, the degree of trust. I'm going to go, sorry Peter, I'm going to go through this very quickly now. Yeah. I suppose just in conclusion, and I apologize for going over, I think it's really, if I may say so, important. There's some really wonderful opportunities out there. I did have threats and opportunities which I've left out because of the time, but the bottom line is it's really important, as we've got on the screen, hang together or hang alone. As I said, all these symptoms and signs, what's happening in South Africa, the challenges that are presented, those that are going to come up, are not unique to South Africa. There are many countries that have undergone what we will still undergo, and independent practice has survived. So thank you so much for the opportunity, SB Media, and I apologise if I've gone over my time. Thanks very much.
As you just heard, there are no easy answers and there are no quick answers, as I said at the beginning of the evening. It's a very, very complex and dynamic situation. Right, now we're going to hear a legal opinion. Now normally, if you were to consult with an advocate for 15 minutes and get the bill afterwards, you'd probably be admitted to hospital. Tonight you get it free, which is quite amazing. Nikki, apart from being a good friend of mine, is a member of the Johannesburg Bar. By that I don't mean the pub down the road. Okay? Yes. She's also a member of that bar, yeah. She works as an in-house counsel at Section 27. I'm sure you've heard of that. If you've got a television set, you've probably heard of Section 27. It is a public interest law centre based in Johannesburg. She's involved in cases on the right of access to healthcare services and the right to basic education. These cases include the Limpopo textbook litigation, which I'm sure you all remember, where children went to school without books. Don't ask me how. And the Lafesa Domeni tragedy, is no other word for it, as well as the several other cases to advance the rights of the poor and marginalised. Prior to joining the bar, Nikki worked as an attorney at Section 27, focusing on the right to basic education. She has a BA and an LLB from the University of Witwatersrand and an LLM from the University of Virginia in the United States. After completing her studies, Nikki clerked for Justice Bess in Kabindi at that little court up on the hill called the Constitutional Court. I've asked Nikki to contain her presentation to words of less than 8 syllables and to not have any Latin, because I'm assuming here that none of us have too much legal knowledge. I certainly don't have. It is with great pleasure that I introduce you to Advocate Nikki Steyn.
Can't see over the podium. Hi everyone, and thank you so much for having me tonight, all of you, and for that introduction, Peter. I heard Harry make reference to acronymology, and I'm hoping that I don't have too much acronymitis, but if I do, I'll hopefully get that from your faces, and just feel free to shoot your hand up if I'm using too many Latin words or acronyms. I've been asked to come this evening to talk to you about 2 significant bills that have been introduced and have been released for public comment, and I'll get back later to what that public comment process is. The first is the National Health Insurance Bill, and the second is the Medical Schemes Amendment Bill. And I've been asked specifically to look at how these bills are going to affect the practice of optometry and the practice of independent optometrists. And in order to do that, I think it's necessary to start off with an assessment of the position as it currently stands. So, as we all know, our health system is divided into the public sector and the private sector, and there are massive disparities in the resources available to these sectors and to the quality of care that they provide. 16% of the population has a medical scheme membership. The rest of the population is entirely reliant on the public sector to meet their needs. So what does this mean in practice? You probably see patients who are in the private sector and who belong to medical schemes. They pay a monthly premium in exchange for whatever benefits the schemes offer. Regardless of the plan that they select and the scheme that they belong to, they receive cover for the diagnosis and treatment of a series of conditions classified as prescribed minimum benefits, and I'm going to refer to these as PMBs. All medical schemes are obliged to pay for PMBs in full. There are no co-payments unless the patient decides that they want to access these benefits at somewhere other than a designated service provider. So under the prescribed minimum benefit regime as it stands, medical schemes carry the responsibility in respect of the diagnosis and treatment of these defined conditions. As far as optometry goes, though, it's not the whole spectrum of conditions that you're trained to diagnose and treat. The PMBs extend only to screening for certain conditions, and we'll get back to that later. Whatever falls outside of the PMBs may be covered by the medical scheme's day-to-day benefits, and these depend on the plan selected by the member, but most of them include some kind of optometry and eye care benefit in the day-to-day benefits. So as it stands now, if you're part of that 16%, your access to eye care services is pretty good. Not so much if you're in the public sector. So while in theory there's some provisions for access to optometric services, Harry tells me that there are currently only 300 optometrists employed in the public sector across the country, and that the distribution of these optometrists doesn't correspond with the need for eye care services. So if you happen to live in the wrong place, you probably won't get the eye care that you need. Even where there is an optometrist employed in a public sector post, there's severe challenges with things like equipment available for optometrists to provide the services that they're trained to provide. In the public sector, there are a few specific interventions that recognize the importance of eye care. So for example, the Integrated School Health Policy recognizes the importance of eye care in primary health care for children to improve the general health of school-going children, but also in recognition of the important role that vision plays in education and the consequent improvements in health outcomes that grow from an improvement in the education outcomes. So, to put it simply, the most classic story is that of the child who sits in the back row of the classroom and can't do a single sum, and as soon as the teacher moves that child into the front row, he becomes a maths genius. Indeed, based on information from the South African Optometric Association, refractive blindness is the second highest cause of blindness after cataracts. Sub-Saharan Africa carries 60% of the global burden of preventable blindness, and South Africa has at least twice the burden of disease of an average developing country. So the Integrated School Health Policy makes sense. It's an example of rational thinking, recognizing the important role that you as optometrists play in health and in education. Just as an aside, because I'll never miss an opportunity to tell you about my work, I'm currently working on a case where the government has had no system in place ever to provide Braille textbooks to learners with visual impairments. So while some learners who have visual impairments have got their Braille textbooks, most don't. So if you're blind or partially sighted, you haven't had a condition that's been identified or has been treated, the chance of you receiving not only a quality education, but any education at all is pretty slim. So the position we're in, and particularly the fact that 84% of people rely on the public sector for their eye care needs to change. If we leave things as they are, we continue to perpetuate inequality. We deny people healthcare services, education, dignity, jobs, simply because they are poor and they can't afford to go to an optometrist. If you think about things more in the rands and cents way, we're depriving people of services that remedy the barriers to their ability to contribute to our economy. If you can't access basic education, if your health outcomes are poor, you cannot unlock your full potential to contribute to your society. And again, I'm quoting the South African Optometric Association, which says that an annual figure of $270 billion, that's the global economic cost of blindness, on productivity alone. So it makes sense against that background that the Minister of Health wants to do something, to introduce universal health care for everyone, and the way that he's chosen to do so is through these two bills. The first is the National Health Insurance Bill, which, and I'm going to be polite about it, to be frank, it's lacking in detail. But what it does seem to do is to create one enormous national health insurance fund, which will collect revenue and purchase healthcare services from both public and private healthcare providers on behalf of the state. Now, there are a lot of controversial issues arising from just that, and unfortunately we don't have time to go into those. I know that there's a soccer match to watch. What's important for this discussion is that the National Health Insurance Bill makes repeated reference to a basket of primary healthcare services, and we don't yet know what it is. We know that whatever falls in this basket of services will be covered by the NHI fund. We know that everything that falls outside of the basket will be for the patient's own account. But we don't actually know where universal health coverage ends and out-of-pocket payments begin. I've been told again by Harry that the South African Optometric Association has been engaging the Department of Health to secure optometric services as part of this basket, and that the negotiated services in fact go beyond just screening for conditions as you currently see in the prescribed minimum benefits. The existence of medical schemes is premised on the concept of cross-subsidization. So all members pay a premium based on whatever plan they select, but not all members draw from the medical scheme to the same extent. So in theory, the rich subsidize the poor, the healthy subsidize the sick, the young subsidize the old, and so on. We all get our turn to make our contributions and then to draw from the medical scheme. But this isn't the case in practice, and the Minister of Health has recognized this. In fact, in the explanatory memorandum to the Medical Schemes Amendment Bill, one of the objects of the bill is listed as the provision of a benefit structure within medical schemes that reduces complexity and facilitates greater cross-subsidization across the membership of the medical scheme. Essentially what that means, thank you for that. Essentially what that means is that it's intended to cross-subsidize, but the rich stay rich, the healthy stay healthy, the poor stay poor, the sick stay sick, and everybody just gets older. We don't have time, unfortunately, to go into all of the proposed amendments, but I want to discuss the key one, and that is the abolition of the system of prescribed minimum benefits and co-payments, and its replacement with the requirement that medical schemes provide full cover for a basket of primary healthcare services. And for those services, the medical schemes will negotiate fees with healthcare service providers and will then be liable in full for the negotiated rate. Again, I use the term basket of primary healthcare services. I wish I could tell you what fell into that basket. I can't. But I do know from Harry, he's my biggest citation in this presentation, that the South African Optometric Association has been negotiating on this exact issue. They've been intimately involved in the process, and that they're advocating strongly for optometric services to be included. And again, more broadly than just the limited screening for certain conditions. But unfortunately, that's the extent of our certainty. What's more certain is that operating a medical scheme is going to become more expensive. There'll be greater scope for abuse of the system, and so medical schemes are going to take steps to protect themselves. How do they do this? By increasing premiums and by reducing available benefits, and those are the benefits available to your patients. So from the patient's perspective, things are looking a little bit bleak. To add to that, there's going to have to be some kind of tax to raise revenue for this NHI fund that the bill speaks of. And there's a lot of debate on how to do this. I want to just draw a parallel to the current debate on the increase in VAT from 14% to 15%. Now, I'm sure everyone in this room has complained a little bit about how they've been affected by the 1% increase in VAT. It makes things more expensive for all of us. But the people who are most affected by that 1% increase are those who can least afford to be affected. And the same goes for whatever measures intended to raise revenue for the NHI fund. So in order to address these criticisms and hopefully think rationally about how you're affecting the poorest of the poor, it's likely that the revenue will be raised primarily from the part of the population already paying for medical scheme membership and accessing private healthcare services. It's very unlikely that all of these people are going to be able to continue to afford their membership and the NHI, whatever tax comes in. And possibly the ones who are going to give up or reduce their benefits are going to be the ones who are actually cross-subsidizing at the moment. If you are young, if you are healthy, if you are rich, you've got less need to belong to a medical scheme and to pay for the healthcare services that the poor, the old, and the sick are receiving. So from the perspective of the optometrist, it's difficult. You continue to rely on members of medical schemes or on people who can pay directly for eye care, and I'm talking about optometrists in the private sector. Whatever's included in the primary healthcare services referred to in the Medical Schemes Amendment Bill will be covered by rates that have been negotiated with the medical schemes. But if you don't negotiate those properly, everything else will be for the patient's own account, and your patients are going to be more stretched. Optometrists are also going to need to follow the accreditation processes in order to contract with the NHI fund so that you can become one of the accredited service providers as part of the provision of universal health care, and obviously dependent on the inclusion of optometry in that basket of services that I referred to earlier. So for this purpose, there will be a compliance and standards committee formed, and they will ensure that standards are complied with to ensure that your patients continue to receive high levels of health care. So essentially what I've been doing is standing here and making you all quite miserable. I might as well tell you England's about to win the semi-finals. So I'm going to try and get a glimmer of hope in all of this, and it's one that I really believe in. This is not just all doom and gloom. This is an opportunity for optometrists. Both the NHI Bill and the Medical Schemes Amendment Bill have been put out for public comment, and there is a long and involved process of engagement that has to be followed before they become law in black and white. We already know that there's going to be strong opposition from a lot of advocacy groups. We know that there is criticism because the public health system is struggling with its current burden, and an additional burden is quite honestly going to make the system collapse. We know that there are drug stockouts, equipment shortages, human resources problems, poor record keeping, and of course the medical schemes who are going to be so badly affected by this are not just going to take this lying down. There are lots of competing voices out there who are either going to oppose the bills entirely, or they're going to propose constructive amendments to the bills. Don't let the voices of the optometrists be drowned out. Harry spoke in this presentation about organizations that speak on your behalf. They cannot speak on your behalf if you don't speak to them and tell them what words you want to be spoken. Optometry should be seen as a primary healthcare service. Its contribution to education, its contribution to the economy, its contribution to health outcomes have all effectively been accepted by the government through the inclusion of optometry in the integrated school health program. Take advantage of that and push that in the public comment process. We can't, unfortunately or fortunately, expect that the bills are going to be completely abandoned and we'll carry on with business as usual. But there is so much space to create constructive dialogue with the relevant organs of state to enable you to continue to provide the services that you're currently providing. Seize the opportunity, make submissions, talk to the South African Optometric Association, talk to each other, and make sure that we as the public can continue to access the services that you offer. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you very much. Whew. Doom and gloom. Okay. We've actually done very well time-wise for the 10:30 cricket match or whatever it is. I now have the great pleasure in introducing John Steyn. Once again, if there's somebody who doesn't need any introduction, it's John. He's been around in this industry for about 1,000,000 years. He looks remarkably young for it, but he's been in the industry actually since 1968. A lot of people in this room probably weren't born in 1968. That's 50 years for those whose maths is not so great. He practiced as an optometrist for 30 years, and while in practice he developed the Optimax practice management system. He served on the coding committee of the SAOA since 1984, and after giving up practice, John started the SB Media Promotions and the Optical Assistant. And the Optical Assistant guideline tariff is well known to all of you and widely used in the industry. John has an interest and a passion, I might say, for independent optometry. And I think what you're about to hear, well, I hope you're sitting down. Well, you are. Most of you are sitting down. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me very great pleasure to introduce Mr. John Steyn.
Excuse me if I set up my computer. I have an idea how to. I'm not sure if I'm tall enough for Russell to be able to mainly the box. My talk is on technology. And before I start, I want to thank everybody for coming out here this evening. I know it's soccer semi-final night, and some of us are opposed to England winning. Some of us are for England winning, but we'll leave that for another time. I'll get through this as fast as I can, with Peter pushing on me as fast as possible. My section of the talk is around technology and what impact it has been and will continue to be on optometry. Technology has played a huge part in the advancement of optometric examinations. Now you can improve accuracy, share measurements, readings and images with colleagues, and even get second opinions. And in fact, if I go back to my years in practice, I stopped practicing in 1994, and had I known that all of these lovely things, lovely technology aspects were coming to optometry, I probably would have stayed on because I love technology. But unfortunately, similar technical advances, particularly over the internet, have allowed many other people to encroach on our field. Very few people, and if I look around, I see Steve Goldberg, I see Brian Snegg, and probably nobody else who can remember the late 60s and 70s when advertising was prohibited. Shops had closed windows, and the brass plate was all you had to announce your presence. Optometry as a profession at that stage included the sale of frames, lenses, and contact lenses. Over the years, more and more restrictions were lifted. Frame stores opened. Sunglasses were sold at pharmacies. Ready-made readers were available at departmental stores. Previously a no-no, prices and special offers were advertised. So, from our original range of services and products, which I disagree a little bit with Harry, my figures show 12% being the examination side of things and 88% being the materials. We found ourselves competing with these sunglass outlets, supermarkets, frame stores, and informal markets. And at the same time, the use of technology increased. More and more people started buying books, TVs, and computers online. And let's face it, ladies and gentlemen, like TVs and iPads and toothpaste, eyewear has just become another commodity. Big American stores like Zenny Optical, Warby Parker, and many more soon took a big chunk of the American market.
So, you want to tell me how this lady's money ended up in your pocket?
I'm going to tell you everything. I was at a friend's place. I decided to take the metro. It was about 1 a.m.
Which metro station?
I can't remember. It was pitch dark. One thing I remember for sure. There was a Vision Hub display because I took the time to buy myself a pair of glasses. Look. What do you think?
It's your well. Go on.
And that's when it happened. That's when she came running behind me. All of a sudden, boom, grabs me by the neck. I didn't see it coming. Grabs me like this.
I'm ready to believe everything you say. But something doesn't add up. You tell me this happened while you were trying to buy glasses in the metro at 1 o'clock in the morning?
That's right.
Cut that bullshit! Now!
Vision Hub. Anywhere, anytime.
Can you believe it?
Vision Hub is a kiosk system that allows you to physically select a frame, enter your script, and order your glasses. It can be set up at any mall, and using their measurement device even allows you to order single vision, bifocals, and even multifocals. The proliferation of online stores in the States has led to one company that even offers to run the entire online store for you. They provide images of the vast range of frames, lenses, and contact lenses. You don't need to even keep any stock yourself. All orders are processed by them, sourcing both frame and lenses, or contact lenses, from the supplier. They have the glasses made up and then shipped to the patient, all for a percentage of the total sale. Would it be any surprise to discover that My Online Optical, who set up these websites, is owned by the same company that owns Vision Hub? Who's likely to buy online? Mainly contact lens wearers at this point. What are they buying? 30% of recent buyers purchased contact lenses online. 22.5% of recent buyers purchased prescription lenses online. What are they buying online? The number one reason consumers are turning to online retailers, according to Review of Optometry, is cost. The advantages to the patient is mainly price and then convenience. What can you do? Number one, you can compete by starting your own online store. All-out competition, if that's what you want to do. But remember that you're up against big business or companies that are spending big money on advertising. Also remember to factor in setup costs, ongoing photography, website updating, and delivery costs. All these are not insignificant. If you do decide to go this route, please don't compete on pricing alone. Nobody wins. Rather offer some kind of additional service that may give you a competitive edge. And most important, make sure that whatever you do is legal. Current registration, as far as I can ascertain from Harry, is very loose and very vague. All that I could find out was that a contact lens prescription may not be more than 1 year old, and that it must be provided before contact lenses can be supplied. From a spectacle point of view, spectacles must be physically dispensed at a brick and mortar practice, presumably by an optometrist or a dispenser. Another option for what you can do is to add selective e-commerce to your own website. For example, contact lenses at competitive prices, mainly targeting your own patients. Most important, and I really want to stress this, hold on to your existing patients. Make it known to your patients that they don't need to go elsewhere to purchase their lenses. The next thing that you can do, and probably the most important thing you can do, is to improve your patient experience. Start from the time that the patient walks in. How are they handled by the front staff? Can this be improved? The answer is always yes. Connect with your patient. Spend time during the examination explaining findings to your patient. Give them options for lens materials, tints and coatings. Be genuine. Don't try to upsell. Maybe it's more money in your pocket, but at the end of the day, you need to have your patient at heart. If your frontliner assists with frame selection, make sure that you or your dispenser checks the final fitting and takes measurements. This is something the patient won't experience online. When dispensing contact lenses, don't simply allow the frontliner to hand the lenses over. My argument all along has been, what is the difference if I go into a practice and I say, I want a box of XYZ lenses, and the receptionist goes to the shelf, picks it out and hands it over to me. What is the difference between that and buying it online? Some people have said responsibility, but I don't know. If the patient feels that the service is the same, whether buying online or from your practice, why shouldn't he buy online? It's at his convenience, and he saves a couple of rand. Remember that it's in your interest to deliver the kind of exceptional patient experience that the big online stores are not able to deliver. Next thing to do is participate in social media. Millennials tend to approach healthcare like any other consumer transaction. Researching doctors online, checking out review sites, and asking for friends' recommendations on Facebook. Make sure that your Facebook page is constantly updated. Advertise your latest promotions. Publicize your contribution to local charities. And showcase your patients with their new eyewear. And finally, and very important, you need to give back to the community. Participate in community events, particularly those that relate to your target patients. You get your name exposed and position yourself as an expert. As a starting point, at least have a collection box for patients to donate old glasses. What is the role of a supply industry? We can't expect the supply industry to look after our interests. As long as they comply with current legislation, they're in the clear. However, it certainly does become a problem when the same supplier competes directly with you, their customer. In the USA, the majority of larger online stores are owned by one company. I won't mention their name, but I'm sure most of you know who I'm talking about. This same company is a major supplier to the industry in the USA and in South Africa. How long before this happens in South Africa? Or is it already happening? But wait, there's more, as they say.
On the Health Watch this morning, imagine getting an eye exam and a prescription for new glasses or contacts without ever leaving your home.
New technology offers do-it-yourself eye exams using just a laptop and a smartphone, but these tests have some eye professionals seeing red. CBS 4's Elliot Rodriguez has the story.
Chikuma has worn glasses and contacts since he was in 3rd grade. Yearly appointments to the eye doctor started to become tiring, so he decided to try something new, an online eye exam he can take at home.
I was a little hesitant at first, but once I got the hang of it, just breezed right through it.
A day later, he had his new prescription in hand.
It saved me some time as far as getting to the eye doctor.
And he's not alone. Aaron Dalek, CEO and co-founder of OpterNative, one of several online eye exam companies, says they've had tens of thousands of people to date sign up to take an at-home eye exam.
All you need is a computer and a smartphone. It takes just 20 to 25 minutes, and you need 10 to 12 feet of space.
Dalek says the online eye exam, which is just a vision test using letters and shapes, is similar to what you might find in an eye doctor's office.
We are now ready to begin your exam.
So over here, the system instructed me to cover up my left eye. I'm taking a look at the screen and I'm choosing which number I see on the screen.
Once you finish the test, your results are sent to an ophthalmologist in your state who evaluates them and writes you a prescription you can use anywhere.
It's much more convenient and less expensive than going to the eye doctor.
But is it enough? Dr. Stephen Loomis, president of the American Optometric Association, doesn't think so.
I just don't understand how just looking at those numbers that come back from an automated system can really tell the doctor what he or she needs to know regarding what that patient's prescription ought to be.
Loomis worries that patients will be misled into thinking they've had a complete eye exam when in reality the vision is only a small part of what eye doctors look for.
They examine the cornea, the tear film, all the components of the external portion of the eye.
Dalek insists their system was never designed to replace traditional eye exams, only supplement them.
We care very deeply about patients' eye health, and we make it so that patients cannot use the alternative exam more than 4 years in a row.
As for Chikuma, he's enjoying his new prescription now, but plans to head back to the eye doctor next time around.
I think I'm going to be able to use them both.
Elliot Rodriguez, CBS 4 This Morning.
And right now that eye exam is only for patients 18 to 40 years old. It costs $40 for either glasses or contacts or $60 for both. They do not accept vision insurance at this time.
That's a great deal, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty cool.
Yep, pretty cool. And this is available in 37 American states. Frightening. South Africa. At the moment, not legal, but who knows in the future when it becomes important to get eye care to the masses.
Look on the bright side, Dad. Did you know that the Chinese use the same word for crisis as they do for opportunity?
Yes, opportunity. You're right.
Let us turn shoptometry back into optometry. I think that my main call this evening is for the profession to stand together. We have never been as divided and splintered as we are now. We have many threats in front of us, and unless we confront them as a unified force, we can find ourselves on the wrong side. Thank you.